Good evening, Longmont and beyond. This is Ann Macca. I'm the Curator of Education here at the Longmont Museum, and you are joining me tonight for our Polymer Clay Art and Sip series. This is our second class, and tonight's project is Phases of the Moon Wall Hanging. So this evening, I'd like to give just a couple of moments in case there's a few more people who would like to tune in. In case you're not already set to go ahead and gather your materials and prepare your workspace. Okay. So once again, welcome. My name is Ann Macca. I'm the Curator of Education here at the Longmont Museum. I've worked here for about 8 years now, and I feel extremely lucky because I get to teach lots of different subjects, everything from local history to live visual art. I studied sculpture in college years and years ago, and this is one of the few opportunities I get these days to actually pursue that and teach it to other people. So thanks again so much for joining me. I expect this class will be somewhere between an hour and an hour and a half long this evening. And if you are here joining us through Facebook, if I'm going too fast for you, you can certainly pause the program on Facebook Live and rewind it. You can also fast forward up until whatever the current moment in the program is, but obviously you can't go into the future. If you are watching on channel 8 or 880 with Longmont Public Media, thanks for joining us. We would love to hear from you. We don't always know how many people are watching or what kind of experience they're having unless they send us an email and let us know how we're doing. So please feel free to send an email to Longmont Museum if you'd like to let us know how we're doing, what we could do better, or what other kinds of programs you'd like to see in terms of arts and crafts. You can also, of course, visit the Longmont Museum's Facebook page or the Longmont Public Media YouTube channel after this program is over to rewatch it, to share it with a friend, to slow things down, go backward, go forward, catch anything you might have missed. So remember, those are all resources available to you. So thanks again so much for joining us. Thank you to our members who make, whose memberships help support the museum and make programming like this possible. We really appreciate your support. So last week was my very first ever Facebook Live art class. I've certainly done some virtual classes in the past year, but those have mostly been through Zoom or WebEx or other platforms where you're able to communicate one-on-one with your audience, with your classmates, class members. And this has been a big challenge for me. So if you did tune in last week, if I went a little too fast, I do apologize. We did have some technical difficulties as well. So thanks for coming back. And I just want to say, if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and use the chat function in Facebook Live. We have a coworker who will communicate your questions to me. There's probably going to be about a 30-second delay. So don't be confused if I don't answer you right away, but I will certainly keep my eye on the chat and try and make sure that I answer any questions that come in. And they can be questions, or you can just ask to repeat anything that I've skipped, anything like that, that'd be fine. So right now, Longmont Museum has an Impressionism exhibit. We're featuring artwork of Degas, Monet, Pissarro, and their printmaker, William Thornley. It's quite a beautiful exhibit. We are currently open to the public Tuesday through Saturday from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. I encourage you to come in and check that out. It does help to have a timed ticket because we still are under limited gallery visitation restrictions per COVID recommendations through Boulder County. We are keeping a close eye on the recommendations and requirements, and we are staying on track and on top of that. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started here. I'm going to show you the sample of the artwork that we are going to make tonight. So let me switch my video. And hi, let me just show you here on the wall. Oops, maybe not the best view. You can see we have a Phases of the Moon polymer clay wall hanging. Sorry, this is actually kind of a terrible way to show you. These are small, thin polymer clay discs, and we are rolling them anywhere from 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch thick. And then they are about, mine at least, are about 2.5 inches wide each circle. Yours will be whatever size you choose to make them. They can be thicker. I wouldn't recommend going any thinner because it's easy to burn if you go much thinner. So let's walk through the materials here in our workspace. To begin with, just in terms of setting up your workspace, I think it's very important to consider the materials you're working with. So on my table, I'm actually working on a kind of a cruddy craft table that I don't care about ruining. However, polymer clay, the more you work with it, it warms up from your hands and it can become a little bit sticky. So it won't ruin your table, but if you don't want the clay to kind of stick to your table, I suggest putting down a piece of waxed paper. So I have a white paper here with a black construction paper just to make it easier for you guys to see what I'm doing and to identify my work zone. And then on top of that, I have a piece of wax paper so that my clay doesn't stick to my work surface. Again, this will not ruin your work surface, but if you want to clean up a little bit less mess, I recommend the wax paper. You could also use aluminum foil. You could also use parchment paper. That's entirely up to you. Or none at all. If you do end up with a little bit of a sticky mess on just the table in your home, it is quite easy to clean that up. All you have to do is take a little bit of dish soap and mix it up with some baking soda, like Arm & Hammer, into a little bit of a paste. And then with a sponge or paper towel, if you rub that across the surface, a wet sponge or paper towel, the baking soda and the soap will just pick the clay right up and it won't stick to your table. All right, let's walk through our supplies here one by one, starting with polymer clay. So I'm using just a generic brand polymer clay. It's called Craft Smart, and I'm pretty sure I bought this at Michael's Craft Store here in town. The most common brand names of polymer clay that people know are Sculpey or Fimo, but again, there's a number of off brands of polymer clay. What is unique about polymer clay is that you bake it to harden it. So ceramic, dishware, that's made out of a kind of clay that you actually have to fire at a very high temperature. So it's not the kind of thing you can do at home. There are certainly air dry clays out there, but the nice thing about polymer clay is that a low temperature oven, anywhere between 245 and 300, will bake your polymer clay. It can take a little bit of experimentation. I suggest that you look on your package. And if you don't have your package anymore, or if you can't read it because you cut it open, you can look online on the manufacturer's website to check what temperature and how long to bake your clay. Most polymer clays say to bake at 275 for 15 minutes per 1/4 inch of thickness. So that means if you rolled it out to exactly 1/4 of an inch thick, these are quite a bit thinner than that. and baked it, you would need to bake that for 15 minutes at 275. So if you intend to bake your clay this evening, I suggest you go ahead and turn on your oven or your toaster oven right now, just so that it's hot and ready to go. Even though my clay discs are thinner than 1/4 inch, I still needed to cook them for about 15 minutes. So we'll go over cook times again later in the program, but just so you know, that information is there on your package of clay or the manufacturer's website. Now let's talk about some of the other materials here on our table. Here you see I have a rolling pin. This small rolling pin has these fantastic little spacers on it. If you're a baker, you might know that these spacers are for rolling out fondant, that's cake icing that you can kind of sculpt, or for rolling out pie crusts. They make these little spacers so you can get a uniform thickness. I like this tool. It's not 100% necessary. Any old flat rolling pin or dowel will certainly work for this project, but that's what I'm using. Okay. I have some Scotch tape. This was actually just to tape down my work surface so it doesn't roll around when I'm working. If you happen to have any kind of tape around, I do suggest you tape down your wax paper or aluminum foil or whatever surface you're working on so that it doesn't roll around on you while you're working. I'm gonna set that aside. What else do I have here? I have some gold metallic paint. This is for finishing our project, so we don't need it right away, but gold metallic paint and a brush. Again, I'll set those aside for now. Any kind of acrylic-based paint will work. You don't want to use a water-based paint because it's easy to wash off. You want something that's going to stick and stay. So I personally prefer just a simple acrylic paint. You could also do a latex paint, just as long as it's not a water base. Or if it is a water base, as long as you seal it at the end. Here I have some round, these are actually cookie cutters that are made specially for polymer clay, but they're just the same as any other cookie cutter. These came again from Michael's Craft Store, or maybe even from Hobby Lobby. You could order them online, or you can even just get them at probably at the grocery store. I like these because they came as a package with maybe 8 different sizes of concentric circles. So I have 2 here, a small one and a large one. This one I would say is a little bit larger than 1/2 inch. And this one's, well, maybe it is 1/2 inch, because look, maybe it's 3/4. Maybe this is 3/4 inch and this is about 2, roughly. I'm going to be using both of these. If you don't happen to have circular cookie cutters or polymer clay cutters, you can certainly use any circle and just cut around the outside of it, such as the lid of a jar, the bottom of a glass, anything circular that's about 2 inches in diameter. Diameter is straight across. And then some kind of a smaller circle as well. Okay. Also, I mean, if you had like a star cookie cutter around, that might be kind of a cute little embellishment to add. I leave that to you to decide what other items you might want to use. Okay, set those guys aside for now. I have a dowel. This is a dowel that is a 1/4 inch. You will need some kind of a stick that is roughly 12 inches long. It does not have to be a dowel. The sample I made was actually just like a twig that I found outside, let it dry to make sure it wasn't gonna bend or move on me. But some kind of a stick or a dowel that's about 12 inches long and is slim, roughly a 1/4 inch thick, okay? I'm gonna put this over here. You're gonna need a knife. This is a little clay knife. It's nothing particularly special. It's just a little plastic clay knife that came with a set of tools. Here's just a paring knife from the kitchen. Nice and sharp, pointy edge, very useful. Then you're going to need some string. I have 3 different kinds of string. You only need 1 kind. Embroidery floss will work. This is just like a simple cotton string about the weight of embroidery floss. This is like a decorative kind of string that's a twisted gold and white cotton together. So it's kind of pretty. but the one thing I don't like about it is the way it kind of frays at the end. But it's a lightweight string, so that would work. This is an embroidery floss and it's a little bit gold colored. I like this a lot, so I'm probably going to use this one. But truly, any kind of string you happen to have hanging around will work just fine. Okay, I have a tiny little square of sandpaper. You may not need the sandpaper, but it's handy to have around just in case. So if you happen to have sandpaper, go ahead and have it handy to use. If you don't have sandpaper, it's probably not a big deal. If you have a box cutter, sharp knife, or X-Acto knife, you might be able to do the same thing you would be doing with the sandpaper anyway. So if you have it, that's great. If you don't have it, don't sweat it. Okay, what else is here on my table? Oh, a little bit of glue. So I happen to use epoxy, like a quick set epoxy pretty often. So I just pulled this out of my desk. It's a 2-part quick set epoxy and a little stick to mix it and a plate to mix it on. Epoxy is pretty stinky and you have to mix it very well. If you don't mix it well enough, it won't set properly. So if you have epoxy, super. If you do not have epoxy, don't sweat it. Again, most any kind of glue will work. Super glue would be fine, wood glue would be fine. Elmer's glue or like a school glue will work, but it might not be super strong and last a long time. If you are a crafter and you have something like E6000 around, that'll work too. You just have to let it sit to dry a little bit longer. I like the epoxy because it's strong and it sets fast. So this is the kind of thing I like to keep around for lots of different projects and to fix things. That's my preference. This is a 5-minute. You can get it even quicker than that, like a 2 or 3 minute. All right, these here have already been baked. It's not the finished sample of the work that we're going to make, but I think they give you a good idea of what direction we're headed. So we are going to continue to use the marbling technique that we learned last week. If you did not, in fact, log in to last week's class or watch it online, don't worry, because I'm going to go over it again. So we are going to start with a little bit of black, a little bit of white. If you don't want your moon to be sort of a gray tone, that's okay. You can add in different colors if you like. Marbling is really fun. And then I also have here just a tiny bit. I know you probably can't tell on the camera, but this is a silver. It has a little bit of a metallic flake in it. I like mixing this in as well because I think it just adds a special kind of depth and a little bit of sparkle and shine to the project. So we're going to use a little bit of that. These are actually just scraps of leftover projects, mostly black and white. So they mix together to make a good gray. And in fact, where we are going to start is with a gray. So the more you work with your polymer clay, the softer it gets and the stickier it gets in your hands. All right. So if you don't already have a little bit of gray hanging out, go ahead and take your sharp knife and cut some of your black and some of your white. We need to make 2 different sets of marbled clay to roll out. We need a lighter and a darker so that we will have these 2 different effects. The darker is going to represent the dark side of the moon. And of course, the lighter will represent the light side of the moon. We're going to punch these items out one by one. And before they get baked, we're going to cut some of them even smaller so that we have crescents and then fat pieces of moon as well. And then ultimately, we're going to mix them up and glue them together. So let's start by making a little bit of gray. Go ahead and cut a generous chunk. My chunk is about 2 inches by 1 inch by maybe 3/8 of an inch-ish of black. I'm gonna grab some white. I'm gonna cut some of this as well. But I think I'm gonna start with my darker marbled piece. So I'm not gonna get quite as much white out. We can always go darker if we want, or lighter, that is, if we want. And just gonna stick these 2 together. They don't have to be perfectly well mixed because in order to get this marbled technique, We want some very dark, some medium, and some a little bit lighter gray. Some of that marbling will be achieved when we twist the different grays, blacks, whites all together at the same time. They become a little bit like layered, translucent layers, so you can see through some of the clay. All right, so in order to mix this well, I'm warming it up with my hands. I'm gonna twist it, I'm gonna squeeze it, I'm gonna roll it, twist it, squeeze it, hand to hand, back and forth. Roll it into a snake. Okay, twist. You're gonna see it's gonna really start mixing together nicely and smoothly any moment now. And even as we mix it, you can see that layered marbling beginning to happen. Ultimately, we want to achieve that in sort of a dark gray tone. So we want to see all those grays and whites start mixing together into a sort of a medium gray like this. This is going to be kind of a dark one, I think, actually. I really like just doing this. It's good exercise for your hands. If you have arthritis or achy hands, especially with this nasty weather coming in, this will be good for you. It'll be a nice way to exercise those hand muscles. This is also a really fun thing to do with kids. It's a great way to work on fine motor skills, kids or adults, actually. When I was little, I used to do this kind of thing with my grandmother, who did have terrible arthritis, and her doctor had prescribed her an exercise with rubber bands. She would put this rubber band around her fingers and would stretch it like that, or we would work together in clay. So it was sort of strength and stretch, and strength and stretch. Okay, you can see my clay has now become kind of a uniform dark color, dark gray, but this gray is lighter than this black. So the next thing I'm going to do is pinch off a bit of this gray. I'm going to mix it with a little bit more white. We're going to make a slightly lighter gray. And what we want is maybe 3 or 4 different shades of gray to work with. Some quite light, some quite dark, but so that when we mix them together, we get the varied effect of the lighter and the darker gray. So again, we continue to mix. Just going to check our chat here real quick and see. I don't see any questions at the moment. And just keep squeezing and twisting and rolling to mix your clay into a nice uniform color that you like. So now you can see we have our very dark gray and we have a slightly less dark gray. I'm now going to pinch that in half again and mix in a little bit more white. And you can see I'm pinching off a nice big chunk of white. Maybe I'll go even bigger with this one so we get a little bit lighter. Try and keep a close eye on your knives. It's never good if you lose a knife. Looks like we have about 10 viewers right now. So thank you so much if you've joined us. So stretch, roll, twist. All right. Something else that is sometimes useful. So when I'm doing a new project, I like to go online and look at what other people are making. Pinterest, Google image search, those are the kinds of places, Etsy even, where people are crafting and selling their work. You can find some really great ideas in places like that. Sometimes it's also helpful to find reference images. For instance, when I made my sample, I went online and I looked for images of phases of the moon, just generally, so that I would have some reference images to look at. Okay, so right now, this is a little bit of a silver that I'm adding to my gray. I'm just going to mix it together so some of that sparkle comes through in the final piece. I have a little chunk of dark gray, not quite black, smaller chunk of medium gray, and then a chunk of light gray. I am going to cut just a little bit of white and add that in as well. I think it's good to vary the sizes of the clay pieces that you're going to mix together, the colors you're going to mix together. And I'm also going to grab a little bit of black. So here we go. Got some black, dark gray, medium gray, light gray, and white. A little bit of each. All right. I'm going to warm up this black with my hands because I just cut it off with a wok and it's a little bit cold and a little bit stiff. What I want to do here is roll out my clay into a snake. You may notice that when I roll, as I roll, I spread my fingers apart. I roll and spread, roll and spread. The reason I do that is that is how you get kind of an even coil. If you're a ceramicist and you do a lot of clay pots or clay pottery, coil pottery, you'll also notice that I don't roll like this. I roll a little bit back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and spread my fingers as I go. And that is how you get an even or a more even coil in the end. Okay, you may notice I pinched off a little bit. I want these to be roughly the same length. Not exactly the same length, but roughly. Oops, that one's gotten a little long too. Okay. You'll see they're not perfectly well mixed. There's a little bit of a lighter streak. That's fine. They're all going to get smushed together in the end anyway. Here's that medium gray, rolling it out, pinching it off. Okay. And now my white. So I have a few different varieties of size and shape that I'm working with here. We are going to twist these guys all together. Are you ready? So I'm going to save all these little chunks, these little extra tidbits. I'll use them in my next lighter marbled clay slab that I'm going to make. So I'm just setting all my little extra tidbits over here. Okay. And again, I'm just going to take a moment to check our chat and see if we have any questions. Oh, hi, Elaine. I'm so glad you're here with us. That's Elaine Waterman from the Firehouse Arts Center. Thanks for joining us. Oh, and Tammy Williams is suggesting never mix clay utensils with eating utensils. That's good advice. Also, by the way, this is polymer clay, but once it's baked, it's not actually food safe. I would not eat off with anything that I made out of polymer clay, just FYI. Thanks, Tammy. Okay, so now I'm going to squeeze all my snakes of clay together into one big clay snake. Okay, and I'm going to twist them. Now, if you were here last week and you participated in our class, you would have seen that we did a really similar thing, but we used different colors. I'm just going to twist and fold, and we're going to twist, some more. And the more we twist things together, and we're going to ball it up into a funny ball like this. And then I'm going to roll it again. And I just want to show you this as I'm going. I'm starting to establish a number of different sort of strata of clay. The different colors are layered. They're starting to mix together a little bit, and they're starting to get kind of funky layers. So it has that neat marbled effect. Okay. I'm going to twist. I'm going to turn. I'm going to twist. And turn it one more time and squeeze it together. So the more you do this, the more you experiment with kind of techniques of rolling and twisting and layering and starting to squeeze your clay out, you'll start to see patterns begin to emerge. I know this looks very contrasty, very light, very dark, but if you were here with me and you could see with your naked eyeballs, you would see that there's many different layers of gray happening both in the dark and in the light. I want these to come together on a little bit more of a uniform value scale. So value scale refers to just light and dark. In contrast is how far apart your lights and your darks are. I want these to be low contrast and also a low value. So I'm going to twist a little bit more and squeeze a little bit more until I feel like I'm getting closer to what I'm looking for. And you'll see here, if I hold this up to the camera, hopefully you guys can see that okay. See those values starting to come together a little bit more, but they're still maintaining their individual identities. Okay. I'm going to squeeze. As I work, squeezing helps me see what kind of patterns are emerging in my marbling. Okay. I'm going to hold this up to you again so you can see. Look at all of this striping that's going on and how one stripe kind of crashes into another and then it swirls. I just really enjoy looking closely at this. And when I start to see patterns emerge that I appreciate, that's when I decide when I'm going to stop or whether I'm going to keep mixing. And it's easy to overmix. If you overmix, there is no disaster. If you overmix and your clay becomes too uniform in color or pattern, set it aside and use it for another project. That's okay. I'm really starting to like this though. So I feel like we're getting close to what I'm looking for here as I squish it out. Yeah, I really like this. So I'm going to show you guys yet again. The more you twist, squeeze, and pinch, the more interesting and intricate your pattern will become. Okay, put this down. So now I feel like I'm at a point where I would like to start rolling out my clay. If you happen to have a rolling pin with little spacers on it, that's great. But yet again, I just want to mention, you don't actually have to have this kind of a tool. You can use either stacked cardboard or a couple of rulers placed on the outside of your work as kind of your guide to keep a uniform thickness, but that's not totally necessary either. If you take your time and you use kind of a uniform pressure, as you roll out your clay, you can get a pretty uniform look. As this is rolling, I'm going to pick this up again, and I like to turn it over and roll, and then turn and roll, so that I can see all the layers emerging on both sides. Sometimes I start on one side and I think I like it, and then I turn it over and decide, wow, I really like the pattern on the other side better. Now we are going to roll, let's see. We need 7 discs total. We need 4 light and we need 4 dark. So I guess that's actually 8 discs total. We're going to end up with sort of a 2 discs that are 50-50, like a half moon semicircle stuck together. Does that make any sense? Probably not. So you want to check as you go how many cuts you think you can get with your cookie cutter or your jar lid or whatever it is you're using to establish your circle. okay? I'm getting there, getting closer. Turn it over. As you go as well, you may notice little bubbles, and miraculously, I can't tell you why, I'm not actually seeing any bubbles in my clay, maybe a tiny one right there. If you identify any bubbles in your clay, I suggest you pop them. If you don't, let's see, I don't know if you guys can see this, but there's a little bit of a bubble right here in the clay. I may simply have not noticed that when I was rolling it out, but if you have a bubble in your clay, when you put your polymer clay into the oven, the heat of that oven will expand the air that's trapped in your clay and create a larger bubble than you even thought you had. So if you happen to identify any small bubbles as you go, I suggest you poke them with a toothpick, with a sharp knife, with something so that air has a chance to escape. And you'll see as I roll this out, the air is going to squeeze out of there. And then I'm going to use my fingers to kind of push it around and squeeze it back together, just to hide those little pokes that I made in there. Roll and roll, roll. Now I'm going to turn her over. I'm actually not pushing so hard yet that these spacers are meeting the table. So that means this green spacer is 1/8 of an inch. That means I'm above 1/8 of an inch. I certainly don't want to go thinner than 1/8 of an inch, because if you do, even though it's fully baked, it might still be kind of flexible. The thinner the clay is, the more flexible it will remain after baking. And I don't want it to be super flexy. So definitely not going to go thinner than 1/8 of an inch. I'm pretty happy with this, what I have here now. I want you to look and see all the variation in both pattern, direction, value, and then contrast. I would call this kind of a medium to high contrast. There's some very light but not white bits. The white has mostly all, even though I took a white snake, a little white coil from here, because we roll it out thin, that white became thinner and thinner and actually took on sort of a gray tint. But again, if you look very closely, you see little bits of like a sharp white edge here and there. And I think that's really nice. Of course, I know that the real moon is not a marbled surface. It's more of a pockmarked surface, but I think this effect is really nice. Okay, so one final roll there. Now, I'm going to decide where I want to punch the circles in my clay. You may certainly do this with, like I said, a jar lid, and you just place that jar lid or whatever circle on the surface of your clay, and then cut around it with your sharp knife, your X-Acto knife, your box cutter, whatever you have that you're using for that purpose. I'm just going to press. And before I decide to press right through the clay, I like to kind of hold my circle cutter above the clay, and I'm using the circle to map out what kind of a pattern I'm going to get in the hole in the circle that I cut. It's kind of a neat way to do it, because you can, like, I don't love this big medium gray blob that's there by itself. That's not my favorite part, so I'm actually going to avoid that with my cutter. And I'm going to look for the more interesting, swirly, layered segments. This one's pretty okay. I'm going to go here too. Now, I'm not super fan of this whole area. It's a maybe for me. So what I'm going to do is pick this up. I'm going to peel off the little bits that are hanging. I'm going to look at the other side. And I think I actually like this side better than the opposite side of the same piece of clay. These little scraps, just going to squeeze them into a wad. I'm going to set them aside because we'll probably end up using that in our next piece, in our next slab roll, that is. All right, I'm going to go here next. And now I've got 4 2-inch circles, but I also want to cut out a smaller circle. So I'm going to use this little 3/4 inch to cut out maybe a couple more pieces. I might use all of them in the phases of the moon wall hanging we're making today, or if I have quite a few extras, maybe I'll make a pair of earrings or some other jewelry. It's always kind of fun to punch out extra pieces and keep them hanging around. You never know what you might use them for in the future. So still I'm looking for my favorite spots in this clay where I really enjoy the patterns and the layering and the contrast. So there's that. I'm turning it over one more time because sometimes you can squeeze into these little teeny areas that have really fun layers and shapes in them. So I'm going to steal one from right there. That one's kind of fun. I guess if you think about it, these almost look more like planets than satellites, or at least than our satellite, than the moon. All right, I think I'm good for now. So I'm going to set these aside. There's more work to do on them yet, but for now, they're at a good place to stop and then move on to our next marbled slab. So taking my scraps, wadding them together, making a little ball. I'm not even going to mix this fully. I'm going to leave it all stripy like that because it's actually going to give a lot of character to our next slab. So I'll set that aside right there. If you, some of the feedback I got last week was that I had encouraged people to use oven-safe dishes to bake their clay. And some folks had difficulty with that and didn't end up really appreciating their final result and were worried that they had in fact ruined their dishes. I personally have never ruined a dish or any kind of bakeware with polymer clay. What I find is that you bake the clay, and as long as you let it cool, it pops right off of that surface. And I showed an example last week, and of course I threw it away. But right before last week's class, I made a sample and I baked it. And for some crazy reason, I set the oven to 475 instead of 275. So it was super hot. And then I threw my clay in there and I let it bake. And when I came back to it, it smelled like burning plastic. And it was such a hot mess, you guys. It was totally looked almost like a bubbly brown. It was entirely sort of like black brown. And those were not the colors I used. It was very bubbly and super duper burnt. I set it aside, and as soon as it was cool, it popped right out of the dish. There were like a few burn marks left on the dish, but just like cleaning up your workspace, my recommendation is if something like that happens to you, you take a little paste made of dish soap and baking soda and just scrub it off. It will come right off. And again, because this is a low fire clay, it's not going to leave any nasty residue. It's not toxic in that way, as long as you clean it properly. If you don't want to mix your baking dish with polymer clay, like you don't want to make cookies on the same dish that you're going to bake polymer clay, and you don't have a junky cookie sheet that you would want to use, you can simply do what I've done here. This is a piece of cardboard. It's not corrugated, but corrugated cardboard would be fine. This is like the back of a notepad. I just cut it down to a smaller size, and then I completely wrapped it like a package in aluminum foil. You could do the same thing on your baking sheet if you wanted to, just like put out a piece of aluminum foil. You could do this also the same thing if you were baking inside of a dish that you wanted your clay to take the shape of that dish. Aluminum foil is actually a really wonderful tool when you're working with polymer clay because you can mold it and shape it and then use it as a form to bake your clay on top of so that your clay has some support under it and can take a shape. If you don't have any support and say you want something that's ball shaped like this, if there's nothing in there to support it, as soon as that clay gets hot, it's going to go bleh and melt down. If it's thin, that is. Anyway, all that to say, if you don't want to ruin your cookie sheet or you're worried about a dish, just wrap it in tin foil. That's fine. Try and make it as flat as you can because hot polymer clay will take on the texture of the surface of whatever you put it on. So if this was all rumply and crinkly, my polymer clay, the back side of it would take on that texture, and I don't want that. You might want that. So for another project, you might consider doing that on purpose. I am not doing that on purpose. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna use my sharp knife. These are thin now and very sensitive. I'm gonna use my sharp knife to kind of lift up and place my little clay discs on my tiny little aluminum foil baking sheet. They should not spread, so they can be pretty close together and not have a problem. Just a reminder, I am not going to cook these yet. I'm not going to bake them yet. I'm just getting them kind of off my work surface so I can move on to the next step of the project without these guys in my way. Here we go. Okay. So I have my 4 dark discs, my dark marbled sides of the moon. I guess this is the side of the moon that is not facing the sun. And then I have my little baby discs. Whoops. This one. So the more you handle it, it's quite soft, the more malformed it will become. You can use your fingers to kind of even it out. You can set it down on your baking sheet and kind of go boop, boop, boop. Give it a little bit of love. Or you can not worry about it, because after you take this out of the oven and let it cool, you can use a sharp knife or a little bit of sandpaper to smooth out any funny edges. Another nice thing about that marbling technique is that it sort of masks any imperfections in the clay that you've punched out. Okay, so this is all my dark side of the moon. I'm going to set it aside, and we're going to move back on to the light side of the moon. Okay, we'll be bringing this back in a moment. That side. So here's all my scrap from the last slab that we rolled out. I'm going to be using this scrap. I'm going to be using, I have some other clay bits over here, just like some different grays. I'm going to use some of these as well. This is my little bit of silver. So I'm going to turn just a tiny bit of silver into a snake right off the bat. We're aiming for roughly the same size. It was like, you know, a small handful, maybe about the size of an egg. A large egg was what the size of that total ball of clay that I made last time was, roughly. Okay, so I have like kind of a light gray. I have the scraps, which in the end end up being sort of a medium gray. I'm going to set aside this dark gray ball. I don't want this one to get as dark as the last one. So I'm going to set this aside and use it again another time. Here's another kind of medium gray. Do I want that? Meh. I don't know. I'm having a hard time deciding, guys. Okay, here's a light gray. I'm going to start by mixing this light gray with some white. So we get quite a light gray, but not quite white. Okay. So here's my chunk of polymer clay. Just another thing to know about this off-brand polymer clay. Like I said, I bought this one at Michael's, but I think you can probably get the same type of off-brand polymer clay, like not commercial brand polymer clay, at Hobby Lobby or on Amazon or some other online art store. The off-brand stuff you can buy in a big 1 pound block. I love buying black and white in those big 1 pound blocks because I use a lot of it. And if I want to spend a little bit more money on a fun color or metallic, I will go ahead and buy smaller pieces of that kind of clay. But buying the large black and the large white is really nice because you can just use so much of it, you know, and it seems, in my experience, it seems to mix just fine, the off-brand and the commercial. Of course, I started using polymer clay when I was a little kid, you know, like probably 8 years old or something. And I only remember there being Sculpey. I don't remember Fimo at all. It probably was around, but I never saw it. So when I was little, I really never ran into a question of whether or not you can mix brands. I just started doing it, and it's always worked out fine for me. People who are maybe a little bit more serious about Sculpey and Fimo, they might have a different opinion. But I find that mixing is really no problem at all. Let me take a moment and look, no new questions in our chat. Okay, so we're gonna roll, stretch, roll and stretch, whoops. All right, now the value is the lightness or darkness of this gray is about the same. I know you guys can't see the sparkle, but this is a silver. It's about the same as that, okay? We have the darker leftover bit from our last project, and I'm gonna cut another nice biggish chunk of white. And we're gonna start rolling this bad boy together and just see how it comes out and see if we like what it's looking like, okay? This is fun because there's no specific rules. There's no formula to this. There's no right, there's no wrong. And if you don't like it, you just kind of keep working. If you overwork it, you say, oh well, learned a lesson and move on. I'm even thinking, I don't know, guys. So this one was a baked disc from my sample series. And you probably can't see it super well, but there's a lot of variation in the gray striation. It's quite high value. It's quite light in color or light in value. But there is some variation, low contrast between the grays in here that are hard to see on the camera. Another thing you probably can't see super well is that I totally over baked this. So it is actually slightly yellowed. Over baking our clay doesn't mean it's not usable, but it might actually alter the color or the final appearance. All right, so I'm setting that aside. Okay, stacking these guys up. And interestingly, there's already some marbling going on because these are all scrap pieces that I did not fully mix, just for fun. I definitely want this to be quite a bit lighter in value than my last slab. So I'm gonna do a lot of twisting, a lot of mushing, a lot of rolling to see how it's coming. If I feel like it's too dark, I might add a little bit more white or a lighter gray just to bring that value up quite a bit and potentially to lower the contrast. Okay, just like before, as I get closer to where I think I want to be, I start to press it out and see what patterns are developing within that marble. I'm not totally in love with this yet, so I'm going to roll it back up one more time here. And I think I'm actually even going to add another little chunk of very light gray. So just a skinny little snake here, but I'm going to mix a little bit of white and a little bit of leftover gray that I had sitting on the side. And now I'm going to mix that in there just to lighten it up a bit and see what comes from it. Okay. When you add a little bit, just throw it right on there, mush it in and start twisting and then see what happens. I like to twist and then to roll and then squeeze. And then smush, just like that. And I'm liking this much better now. I know that was like a very small change. It was just a tiny little change, but sometimes little changes make a big difference. I don't know if you guys can tell the difference. If you were to rewind this just a few seconds and then come back to where we are now, you would see that the marbling pattern is quite different. I feel that it's become quite a bit more complex. I also want to compare what I'm working on now, the value of this to the value of that. This is a much darker value scheme. This is a much lighter value scheme. And I don't know, I'm torn. I think I want to add a little bit more white to this still, just because I feel like these two are a little too close together. Our final product, we want a higher contrast between the two sides of the moon so that the light side is quite a bit lighter than the dark side, but they both have a lot of pattern in the marbling, okay? So I am gonna add a little bit more white to this just to get it up there in value a little bit higher, okay? So here we go. I might even break this white into 2 snakes and roll it in. I'm gonna squeeze this. Oops. This is how you get bubbles, is by just squeezing it like that. You don't want bubbles in there. So flatten that bad boy back out, roll it back up, squeeze, add your white snakes. Not like White Snake, the 80s band, the hair band, but White Snake like white polymer clay snake. Probably some of you guys don't know who White Snake is. That's okay. Okay, I'm rolling. Starting to see quite a bit of light, white, and high contrast going on. So I'm going to twist, 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 scrunch, and squeeze. And ooh, we're getting close. We're getting closer. I can tell we're definitely getting very close to what we want. This side, meh, looks almost like camo. This side, there's quite a bit more layering going on, but I still am kind of feeling that my my contrast is a bit too high. So I'm going to twist one more time. Twist, fold, and roll. It's about 8:30, by the way, friends. We're about a half hour into our, or I'm sorry, a full hour into our program. And I'm anticipating that we're going to go about an hour and a half at this point. Okay, roll one more time. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. Yes, it's much better. Okay, as I start to squeeze this thinner, I'm even going to hit it with the rolling pin here to kind of squish it together and make it a little bit more uniform. If I hold this up here, you can see the many, 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 many layers of low contrast, high value gray. That means it's a light gray with lots of different colors that are not very far apart. So you have to look quite closely to see some of the detail, the wiggling, the marbling that's happening there. But it's very delicate and it's very, I don't know, I just think it's lovely. Maybe that's not a great descriptive word to use. Lovely. Okay, I'm going to show you one more time. Next to our dark side of the moon, the contrast here I think is significant enough that we have a lighter marbling going on and a darker marbling going on. I think this will represent just fine the light side of the moon and the dark side of the moon, okay? Set that aside. Set those dark sides of the moon aside and continue rolling out our slab here. Ooh, I have a big bubble here. Can you guys see that? I don't think you can, but there's a big yucky bubble that if I put this in the oven, that bubble is going to puff up and get really gross. So in order not to end up with some gross saggy clay, I'll try and squeeze all that air out of that bubble. Turn it over. I don't see any other bubbles on this side, so I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, rolling this guy out. I'm trying to work on my gendered language. I keep saying things like roll this guy out or this bad boy. I'm trying to change that. Okay, this slab has ended up to be quite a bit bigger than our last slab, which is fine. There's not really a problem with that. But here it is. And again, I want 4 2-inch size discs. So I'm going to use, well, before I commit to this side, I'm going to turn it over and look at the other side too and decide which side has the more interesting marbling. Ooh, this is a hard one. I kind of like them both. Sometimes that happens. Ooh. I think I'm going to stick to this side. Okay. I'm going to look around. I'm going to find my most unique layers and swirls, like here. And I'm going to frame up my holes. I'm going to punch them out. You can, like I said before, you can cut them if you don't have a circle punch or a cookie cutter. I'll come over here. Do one right there. Okay, pretty good. I'm moving over here. Alrighty. All right. Ooh, sometimes it's hard to decide exactly where you want to put it. Maybe I'll go, should I go up here? It's pretty contrasty up there. Maybe I'll go over here. Does that look good to you guys? I hope so, because I'm going for it. Okay. All right. Now, before I forget, I'm going to use my little punch to punch out some nice small pieces as well. Let's see, what do I like? Over here. I might use these pieces. I might not. Undecided. But I like to have extra little bits that I can use if I want to. That's it for this side. I'm turning this guy over just to see if there's any really nice swirly bits on this side, like right there. Sorry to show you guys the top of my head, but sometimes you really have to look over the top of your work to see it well. Right there. All right, I feel I have enough now. So scraps, I'm going to kind of wad these up and set them to the side, throw them into a plastic bag. You can see I've pretty much demolished the wrapper of this Sculpey clay. So I am going to throw it in plastic just to maintain whatever moisture is in there. And so it doesn't get all smushed all over everything else inside my little polymer clay bin. I'm pretty much done with the rolling pin at this point, so I'm going to set this aside as well. And just like we did before, I am going to use the sharp blade of my paring knife, the sharp edge, to kind of lift up my light side of the moons. I actually see a few small bubbles in here. I think they're not going to be a huge problem because they're pretty tiny. But when we take this out of the oven, I might see that they have gone rogue on me. And actually, before I put them on this, I'm going to lay them out at a little bit of a distance on my work surface here. The reason I'm doing this is because I need to start cutting these, okay? And I need to cut them, well, not all of them. So 2, 1 light and 1 dark will remain whole. We won't cut them at all. So I think my dark one that's going to remain whole, you have to kind of look at them and decide which one you like best. I think my dark one is going to be this one that remains whole. My light one is going to be one of them, but which one? Maybe this one. This is a nice one. This one will also remain whole. So I'm going to stick it right there on my tray. Got a dark, got a light, okay? Now, one of each is going to cut directly in half. So which ones should be the ones we cut in half? I'm going to go with, I guess I'll go with this one and this one, okay? You could use a ruler if you want, but I'm just going to eyeball it. No, and use the sharp side of your knife, not the dull side, by the way. So I'm just eyeballing this and hoping that I get a nice cut. I'm going to call that cut close enough, okay? Whoop, whoop. I hope you guys all really appreciate the sound effects. There. And beep, beep, beep. That one's going to go right next to its partner. Whoopsie. There. Okay. Since I'm just moving across, I might as well make this the dark one that I cut in half. I'm not even going to take it off the sheet. I'm just going to kind of, this one, by the way, you guys, I'm just straightening it up a bit. I'm using the sharp edge of my knife to adjust that little piece, okay? This one, same deal. I'm just going to rock my knife back and forth. I'm going to lift it up. And even though these are edge to edge, there is a cut that goes all the way through. So when I take this out of the oven and when it cools, even if it wants to stick together, I can just go snap and pull it apart, and that will not be a problem. Okay. Now I'm going to take this dark moon. I'm going to put it aside. I'm going to take this light moon. I'm going to line it up here. So now comes the somewhat tricky part. We want to create different thicknesses of crescent moon. So again, in these samples here, you can see, let's see. Oh, turds, don't smush your raw clay. These are cooked. So you can see that I've taken a very slivery, thin crescent that I cut off of this piece and I glued it to this piece. So it was like a switcheroo. So we're gonna eyeball. We're gonna use our cutter again. And you can see here that that's where, see, all I did was cut the circle down a little bit smaller. So here I go. I want to make a match. I'm going to swirl it back and forth just a little bit here. Okay. Oopsie. See, you have to be a little bit delicate because it's easy to smush and fudge your circles, and you don't want your circles to get fudged. They should be delicately handled. Okay. I'm just eyeballing this yet again. So I want to try and get roughly the same size crescent out of this dark piece as I do out of this light piece, because we're going to mix and match. So yet again, I eyeball it, I press it through, and I wiggle it back and forth, just gently. Okay. I'm going to use my knife. I'm going to run that through ever so delicately. Ha 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 ha. Okay. Now, this guy that I kind of smushed before, I didn't ruin him. So it's still fine. Did you catch myself? I caught myself saying he's still fine, but I meant it. Okay. I'm going to place this right next to the other. And these are all the cooked ones. Setting those guys aside. I'm going to gently lift this light side of the moon marble disc. I'm going to set it down. Now I want these guys to be, I want to cut a crescent off of this and this, but slightly larger than that crescent. So still eyeballing here, larger than this crescent, but smaller than a half. So a half would be like roughly right there. We're going to go about like that. Wiggle it back and forth just a little bit. And I'm trying to match it here again. Okay, just eyeballing, hoping for the best, and push it in and wiggle it back and forth. Okay, now these crescent moons are roughly the same size. I'm going to drag the tip of my blade right through there to make sure that's cut really nicely and cleanly. I have all of my little moons, my little dots here, light ones and dark ones. I have my full moon, half moon, and my different sized crescent moons. both in the light and the dark, so that we can do a switcheroo. I'm going to set these aside. If you at home have preheated your oven to 275, now is the time that you could place this in your oven to bake. I am terribly forgetful, so I always set a timer that I will hear loud and clear when I'm baking. I also always double check that I set the temperature correctly, because if you don't, you will either underbake or overbake your clay. So, like I said, if you have preheated your oven, go ahead and pop these in and set a timer for 15 minutes. And then when that 15 minutes is up, you can pull them out and let them cool. I'm not actually going to be baking mine. I'm just going to show you how we're going to finish the project here. Okay. Set these guys aside off camera. Now, here are a number of different discs that I've already baked. We're going to get to these very shortly. Before we get to the discs and gluing them together and finishing them with paint, we are going back to our original materials. My surface here is a little bit sticky. I need to paint this stick, and I don't want to get sticky unbaked polymer clay on my stick. So I am going to pull out another piece of wax paper and set that down on this surface so I can do some painting. I'm also going to wash my hands because they're a little bit greasy and sticky from the clay. Again, if you use some kind of an abrasive material, it will help get the clay off your hands. And by abrasive material, I mean something like baking soda or Fast Orange, which is a super duper hand soap that I like. Okay. A fresh sheet of wax paper. I'm not going to tape this one down because we're just going to use it for painting, not for actually rolling our clay. So I have it laid out here. I'm going to grab my gold metallic paint. I like gold metallic. You could use like a gunmetal or a bronze or something that's not metallic. That's entirely up to you. Black paint would be nice because it would give it a good crisp edge, or even white. But I personally really like the way the gold looks. This has a foil cover that I've cut open, and I just keep folding it back over itself. But it also leaked out just ever so slightly right here. So I'm going to load up my brush, and I am going to do a quick coat of gold paint on my stick. We're painting this now while your discs are baking so that this can dry and the discs can cool. So keep your ears open if you set a timer. All right. This paint is a little bit blobby, so I'm just kind of working it right down the stick. In fact, actually, I need to get in here now. Ooh, I love paint. I'm also just gently rotating this stick as I go. I'm working short strokes, loading my brush a little bit at a time, working short strokes from one end of the stick all the way to the other. I do think this would actually look really nice with like a funky kind of twig that you might find in your yard or in your neighborhood. So I encourage you to try different materials and just see how you like them and how they come out. If your paint is like my paint, you might want to do 2 thin coats rather than trying to do one big fat thick coat. Often multiple thin coats result in a better final product than trying to accomplish one big fat thick coat all at one time to get it done. I'm still using my finger. You can see I'm getting a little paint on my fingers, no biggie. Even acrylic paint comes out, but here's the deal, you guys. If you get acrylic paint on your clothing or on your carpet, do not let it dry. If you don't let it dry, it is very likely that you'll be able to get it out with water and soap, or almost to rinse it out. I cannot tell you how much paint I've spilled on the floor of this classroom. And honestly, if you just flood the paint, flood the carpet with water, and then sponge it up, you get almost all the acrylic paint out of the carpet. I'm not encouraging you to get paint on your carpet, but I am encouraging you not to give up if you've noticed that you have gotten paint on your carpet or on your shirt. That, or just decide that whatever shirt you're wearing is now a paint shirt and wear it the next time you do a project. All right, that's a pretty nice coating. My guess is that the lighting is probably not quite good enough for you to see that that's actually made a difference, that this stick went from kind of a blonde wood pine color to now it's like a shiny gold. Trust me, I promise it's gold. Set that down, and I'm going to let it dry. Throw the lid on your paint, set it aside, rinse out your brush. I didn't actually bring a glass of water over here for my brush, so I'm just gonna wipe it up. Actually, I'll take one more sip of my water and then I'll use my water. Never drink your paint water. That is officially now paint water. Okay. Never let your brushes dry either. Just like your carpet or your shirt, if you allow acrylic paint to dry in any kind of fiber, that it becomes like glue. It's plastic, it dries and hardens, and then that's the end of that. If you want to take good care of your brushes, whether they're cheap or expensive, after you wash them, make an effort to smooth down their bristles. I'm just kind of pinching the bristles back into the shape of this brush. It's a chisel, so it's a flat brush with a chiseled end, an angled end. I'm just trying to get them to come together and point the direction that they should be pointing. Another thing you can do if your brush is a little bit bigger is wash it, get all the paint out of the bristles, and then fold a paper towel over the bristles so that they're held together in a nice shape. They're not like springing out like this little bristle seems to be springing out on the end here. Taking good care of your brushes makes them last a very long time. And it's worth it because sometimes really good brushes are expensive. Okay, so we've painted that. We're gonna let it dry. If your clay discs are in the oven, just remember to keep your ears open for that timer. When your discs come out, you're gonna separate them. So if it's two like this, just snap it. If it's a curve like that, pick it up. You might need your sharp knife to kind of cut that edge one more time and just separate those pieces. Next, you're gonna mix and match. So just like this one is a dark side of the moon and a light side of the crescent. Yet again, I'm just mentioning here, these pieces of clay are not yet baked. If they were baked, I wouldn't have to be so delicate. This would be very rigid. And I would go ahead and switch out the lighter chunk and the darker chunk, okay? This is where your glue comes in. First, you align all of your pieces. You kind of press them together. And then you're gonna mix up your epoxy. I always like to use something disposable, like a disposable plate or piece of scrap cardboard. Squeeze out my epoxy. Mix, 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 mix. Spread, spread, scrape, mix some more. And you mix and you mix and you mix until you think you've mixed for too long, okay? Then you're gonna scoop it up, scrape the glue gently onto the edge of your artwork, of your clay disc, and smush the next disc next to each other. Then set it down and let the glue harden. If it's epoxy, your epoxy will say how long it takes. This is a 5-minute set epoxy. It says it right there, sets in 5 minutes. That doesn't mean you have 5 minutes to work with this epoxy. It starts to get too thick to work with the closer it gets to that 5-minute set time. So on a 5-minute epoxy, it's probably worth spending about 30 seconds mixing. And then you have 30 seconds between up to a minute mixing. And then you have probably oh, I don't know, roughly 3 more minutes to keep working with it. And then it will start to get so thick that you can't use it anymore. That's when you just simply throw this away and squeeze out some more. You want to mix and match all of your clay pieces. So I did these in order like this, so it would be easy to identify which 2 pieces needed to switch and mix. Okay. If you're brave, you could, they make a special glue for polymer clay. I think it's just called polymer clay glue. And that special kind of glue, you can put it on the clay before it's baked, and it would unify these 2 pieces in the oven. I don't really use that very often, but you certainly could, and there's nothing wrong with it. Okay. There's lots of different techniques. More than one way. I already baked them, and I glued them together, and I thought, oh no. Okay, guys, I'm back. Sorry about that. We're having another little technical difficulty here. I was just in the midst of saying, if you happen to put together 2 pieces of clay, like these 2, and they're baked, and you find that one is too long, you can either, after you've glued them together, you can either take an X-Acto knife and just cut that edge off, or this is where your handy dandy sandpaper comes in. You just pick it up and sand it and work it until it's even and smooth. It's pretty simple. Okay. All right, so I've done a switch on each of my clay discs here. If you brought yours out of the oven and you glued them together, this is what they're gonna look like, okay? I'm gonna set this aside once more. Once your glue has dried, you're going back to your paint one more time. So go ahead and open up your acrylic paint. And if you're watching this after the fact, or even if you're going to finish your project tonight, you can let your clay continue to bake and pause and then come back to this part of the show. If you are watching on channel 880, you're just going to have to remember what I'm doing right now and do it on your own. I have every confidence that you can do that. Okay, so I'm going to load up just the tip of my brush with paint. I'm not dunking it deep in there. I'm not getting a ton of paint on there. If you look very closely, I hope you can see that there. It's just a little bit on the tip of my brush. I choose the gold because I think the gold has a nice contrast between the gold and the gray. I think it really stands out. I tried this with like a silver paint, and I just thought the contrast wasn't great enough. And the shimmeriness of the silver didn't stand out enough for me, for my own personal aesthetics, to make it as kind of bright and shiny as I wanted. So what I'm doing here is I'm just moving around the outside of the disc. Just like the stick, it's probably going to need 2 coats. I'm not going to try to do one thick coat all at once. I'm using a little bit of paint at a time, and I am working my way around this disc. Okay. If you get too much paint on your brush, it will kind of smudge over the edge, and you don't want that. If it does smudge over the edge, before it dries, use a clean paper towel or a clean rag, or just the edge of your finger to wipe off the wet paint that has overlapped the edge. So you keep it nice and clean. All the way around. So I would repeat that once it's dried a little bit. I would repeat that and go all the way around. I also really want to highlight the dividing line between the dark side and the light side of this crescent moon. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm using this nice chisel brush. You could use a small round brush if you want, or a really nice pointy brush. Or, you know, if you don't have a lot of brushes at your house, but you have the gold paint, look in your kitchen drawers and see if you can find a toothpick or a skewer. You could just as easily dip the edge of that in there and then use that to drag the paint through this little divot here where the two halves of the moon have welded together. This is also not a must do. I just like the way it looks, so I'm doing it. My glue is just slightly lumpy as well, so I'm not really worried about that. It has a handmade aesthetic. And so there's bound to be a little bit of personality in the final product. You know, showed it was made with love and skill and practice. Okay, so I traced right along that line where it welds together. And just again, I'm going to tell you, it's hard to see here on the camera, but if you see it in person, it's quite a bright golden line that highlights that division between the light crescent moon and the dark side of the moon. Okay, let me show you one of my finished ones if I can, so that you get an idea of how that came together. Coming right in here. I think you can see it a little bit better on this finished piece, that bright line in between. It really highlights the differentiation between the light and the dark side. Okay, so that's how you're going to paint these guys. Yet again, I'm just going to get my brush wet, wipe off the extra paint, work it a little bit with my paper towel, make sure all the paint is out of my brush. Just like that, okay? Put that aside, close up my paint. You're gonna want to do that to every single disc, and you're probably gonna need to do 2 layers. So that's why we're not doing that all live here on this program tonight. It would take an awfully long time. The final arrangement, so once you have all the pieces baked, cooled, glued together, and then painted the edges, the question is how you arrange your final work and hang it. So you saw that we painted our stick, it's a bright gold. I'm gonna hang all of mine from the stick. You should have 1 light, 1 dark, full moon. So this would be like the new moon, this is the full moon, okay? You should have one that's half and half. You should have a skinny and a fat crescent that are the light side of the moon, okay? I'm gonna put my skinny up here, my fat one down here. And then you should have a skinny and a fat dark crescent like these here, okay? I'm alternating. So on this side, I've got the skinny dark crescent, the almost full moon. I can never remember, you guys, which is waxing and which is waning. Waxing, I think, is getting bigger and waning is getting smaller. Anyway, this will be almost full, your waxing moon, okay? And this is almost new, your waning moon. So it's like a circle. And then just for balance, this guy goes in the middle. You could, I don't have two of these finished here. You could make it a larger circle and do half C, half C, half C, half C. You have enough discs to do that. That is not how I arranged mine. I arranged my final piece like this. And then for fun and for just kind of decorative purposes, I added a small disc to both the top and the bottom. I hope you guys can see that whole thing, okay? So the first thing to do is lay it out like this and decide how you want the final composition to look. You do not have to make your final composition in this format. It's just the way I chose. You could certainly do, if you had a longer stick, my stick's only about 12 inches, so this won't work for me. But if you had a longer stick, you might do a line or even like a arch. So you would go something like this, okay? And then sort of an arch pattern and maybe one stick and hang them all from that same stick. That could be kind of a fun way to do it. You could do just a single line like this, top to bottom. So you get the whole spectrum as one line. There's a million different ways you could arrange this. You could also do more steps. And what do I mean by that? I mean, this transition is represented in 7 steps. Whole, a little bit less, half C, a little bit less, whole again. So you could add more steps in between each piece. A slightly skinnier crescent here. A crescent that's between these two sizes here, something that's between this little bit and the half here. So you could certainly make more steps in your spectrum and then have a larger circle or a larger array of moon shapes. I think I mentioned earlier, if you happen to have like star cutters, you could add gold stars to this with gold Sculpey. That'd be kind of fun. Many, many different ways to finish this project, and I leave those up to you. However, the last thing I do want to show you is how they've been attached to the string so that they can hang on the wall, okay? This is what I did. So I took my discs and I laid them on a table just how I wanted them to be arranged. And I glued it all together. That's all I did. I cut my string. You can see this one's here. My camera's not quite far enough away to give you the full view. This side, by the way, is quite messy. This is the back side, the side that's going to hang against the wall. So you won't see all of the paint smoogies and the glue slobs, all that stuff. You lay them down, face down on your work surface, on your wax paper, on your table, on your tin foil, whatever you've chosen as your work surface. Lay them out, cut a long piece of thread, twine, string, lay them on top, and then glue. So you mix up your epoxy or your super glue or whatever you're using, and you push the string into the glue on each piece. My glue runs from both top to bottom of each individual disc. And then you just let it set. Once it has set, because you've laid it out to do the setting, all you have to do now is to tie it onto your stick. I have found the more often I move this, my strings move around back and forth. I used kind of a long string and just tied a bow here at the top. So I can throw this on a nail or a special hook, or if you had something decorative you wanted to hang it from, that would all work. However, my strings want to move around an awful lot. If that is a problem for you, once again, you can tie them, you can space them out exactly where you want them, and then you can throw a little bit of epoxy or another glue on the back of the string where it's going to be against the wall, so that and then let it dry before you pick it up, and that will keep it from shifting back and forth. Okay, Let me see one more time if I can put this up on the wall and then show you guys the final finished piece. Let's see how I can do this. Okay. This is kind of a fun project. It does take a little bit of time to complete, but it's not particularly difficult in my estimation. I like this project because I feel like it's something anybody can do. Marbling is a fun and easy technique. You could certainly change out your colors for a different motif. Oops, sorry, don't get dizzy, guys. I'm just adjusting my camera here so that you can see the final piece on the wall. Ooh, sorry. Okay, here we go. Ooh, I can't even get back far enough to show you the whole thing. There we go. Okay, so you can see they all hang together from the stick against the wall. If I do a big close up here, you can see that nice detail, the gold trim around the outside of the disc. I actually think gold leaf would look really, really beautiful and bright, but I'm not a person who likes fiddly bits like gold leaf or likes to work with it anyway. So you can see all that nice detail. You can see how bright the gold shines against the polymer clay, how evenly it hangs. It's just kind of a sweet little boho decoration. You can order items like this on Etsy that are handmade, but why not make it yourself? It makes a great gift for a friend, a great decoration for your home, or maybe your baby's room, a guest room, something like that. Well, we are about finished. Let me just switch my camera here so I can say, whoops, so I can say goodnight to y'all. Here we go. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Once again, my name is Ann Mack. I'm the Curator of Education. This was our polymer clay Phases of the Moon wall hanging class. And our class next week, we have one more polymer clay project to complete. We will not be marbling again. We're going to do a new technique. We're going to make a little air plant hanger that you could hang in your window or hang on a wall, throw a magnet on it and put it on your fridge. I think it'll be fun. It's an easy project. It's fun. It's a little bit like Zentangle. It's very meditative. So I encourage you all to join me next week and also to check out our Thursday night live stream. On Thursday night, tomorrow night, I think it's Monet's Longmont. So it should be a really wonderful program. I encourage you to log in. Same place, Facebook Live, 7:30 tomorrow night, and same place, Facebook Live, 7:30 next week for our final polymer clay project. All right, everybody, have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.